Thank you all for taking the time to come to our Let's Talk About Art event. For us, the collection is really important to this region and to the community, and as a part of the Canadian cultural properties and cultural landscape. I will ask Shelley and Ian to come forward. Ian Dejardin, who is the director for the McMichael Canadian Art Collection and important art organization, institution, founding for the understanding, I think, both nationally and internationally for Canadian art. I think a lot of us think of McMichael and think of the Group of Seven, and I've charged our esteemed colleague with highlighting the fact that the McMichael is more than the Group of Seven, so I'm really looking forward to his talk. And Shelley Falconer is the Art Gallery of Hamilton's founder, look at that, you've been reincarnated. I don't know what's with me and the word founder tonight, but director and CEO, and I am lucky to have friends like Shelley Falconer, because Ian and I don't know each other, so she made the intro and he was kind enough to respond. So thank you, my friend, for helping to make this gathering possible. I will now stop talking and just let them begin, because we did agree, because I hate it, that I won't read out their bios, because, you know, all of us, you all have been there where you're like, oh Lord, please stop. They will talk about themselves and their institutions. They're on tight times, because I hope you came for an engaging discussion. This is a really important moment. It's an important institution, and I think we're starting to have these conversations. There'll be a series of them. I've already warned Steve that he's going to be part of one of them. Come on, Steve, you know you're excited, because we want to really start to understand what will it mean to help to get this institution reestablished. Why is this collection important? Why should we care about having an art institution in St. Catharines to serve the Niagara region? How do we do this in a way that makes it sustainable and better in the long run? I just realized Carly's here from the city, but I'll do another round of, acknowledgements where people want to hide at the end. Ready? You're on? Okay, Ian, you're first.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here, particularly in the air conditioning. As you can hear, I'm Scottish. This kind of weather just doesn't happen to me. So let's kind of carry on. I thought I'd start just by introducing, if we can get the first slide up. I don't know if you can see it properly, but just to introduce the McMichael. I'm sure many of you, in fact, hands up, who's been to the McMichael, who knows it? Everybody? Good. That's terrific. Now, part of my aim here is just to kind of slightly undercut that, but also to think in terms of the comparison with the Rodman collection, which I've been looking at with great pleasure. Just to remind you here, this is what's known as the Founders Lounge, and the thing about the McMichael is collections always have their own, mythology behind them and a creation story. Ours is basically that it started as a cottage. It's a cabin built by Signe and Robert McMichael in the 1950s. This was actually their first extension. It's now known as the Founders Lounge. The Canoe Lake sign, incidentally, is the sign, allegedly, from the station at Canoe Lake. So it saw Tom Thompson arrive and eventually depart in his coffin, of course. So we hang it there just to remind everyone. But yes, it looks like it's a kind of modernist, Scandi, I don't know what, cabin. And they didn't start out, this is in Kleinburg, it's kind of 40 kilometers outside Toronto. They didn't start out to be collectors, but in 1955, the year I was born, they bought their first painting by Lauren Harris. Not bad, actually, to start. And within 10 years, they had about 200 paintings. And Robert McMichael was an extraordinary man, entrepreneurial in spirit, and he managed to persuade the province, goodness knows how, to take it on as a museum. And then every couple of years, he'd add a wing. And because of the nature of the landscape, the building kind of goes like this. And it's a long walk, I can tell you. Bring your hiking shoes. And it was designed effectively to be a venue to display the permanent collection, which grew rapidly because, again, Robert and Signe were very persuasive people. And they made the effort to reach out to collectors and to surviving artists. Oh dear, I've lost my thing. Hang on. Because 4 at least of the group of 7 were still alive. And this is the thing. Robert McMichael and Signe loved the group of 7. And basically they were interested in the group of 7, all 10 of them. Don't ask. Anyway, they liked them all and they wanted to collect them. And they would add to that list David Milne, Emily Carr, Albert Robinson, Clarence Gagnon. And that was it. That was Canadian art. So, eventually, the whole thing went pear-shaped because Robert McMichael didn't like the way the province was managing the collection. And many of you will probably remember this. In the 90s, it went toxic. And in fact, Robert McMichael took the province to court because he felt that the then brilliant director, Barbara Tyler, heroine of major proportions, was taking it in the wrong direction. She had accepted a major donation from ICI Canada, which included major abstract works and works of the Painters 11, that kind of thing. And this was not what Robert McMichael wanted. It went to court, he won, then it was overturned, then he was put on the board, and it was horrible, frankly, for quite a long time. And I feel I came in 2017. Really, I think even then, at the tail end of toxicity, there was still a certain amount there. So that's the history, but our mandate is very simple. It's basically to celebrate Canadian art. And there you have Jackson, you couldn't do better than that. To celebrate Canadian art, but, and this is an important qualification, in 2011 it was extended to cover all of Canadian art. So those of you who think it's all about the group of 7, no, it's not. And can we go back? Sorry, I'm going to go back one. I've included up there just a few numbers there because the great difference, I've enjoyed very much looking at the Rodman collection, but the thing that of course leaps out at me is that you've got things by Matisse, you've got Hundertwasser, Picasso, Chagall, John Piper, Pierre Soulages, Graham Sutherland, Carol Apple, Cathy Colvitts, Henry Moore. None of these, sadly, are Canadian. And this may come as a shock to you. Therefore, they're not in the McMichael collection. We're just Canadian. I'm very envious of your 10 Harold Town works, by the way. I think they're wonderful. But Jackson, as you can see, this is the major difference between us and the Rodman, is that we have density within certain areas, largely because of the history of the collection. So with Jackson, we have, 521 works by him. I mean, it's silly, really. 353 of them are drawings, and you have drawings in the Rodman, and we have 353 of them. I mean, we can't move for things. They are wonderful, and actually you can move on at this point. I mean, they include things like this. He used drawings like we use an iPhone, just sort of snaps, to use it as background for his paintings. But we also have an awful lot of memorabilia. That's his wallet and his billfold. I know you were wondering where they were. Well, we've got them. We've also got Fred Varley's woolen hat, if you're interested. And we have Jackson's war medals. And this is actually because Jackson lived as a guest of the McMichaels for the last 6 years of his life at the McMichael. Let's move on. Now, you don't have any Tom Thompsons, so I'll just gloat for a minute. I'll just repeat that. You don't have any Tom Thompsons. Well, we have 104 items, and I say items because we have his easel, we have his palette, we've probably got his woolen hat as well, I can't remember. But we have 84 paintings, and we've just opened an exhibition on Thompson because he's close to our hearts. Emily Carr. Now, Emily Carr, you'll notice there's an extraordinary thing here. She's a woman. This is outrageous. Robert McMichael really didn't count women artists. It's a sad but true thing. I discovered this because I put together a list when we set up a Women's Arts Council. And I put up a list of all the artists I could think of, the women artists I could think of, in order that I could tick them off and say how many of everything we had. And the answer was practically nothing. But Robert McMichael liked Emily Carr. So we have 39 items in all, which includes 8 of her absolutely ghastly little her little ceramic things, which she was ashamed of as well. And the one I chose actually was vaguely relevant because it reminded me of Forest Vistas, which is yours. You've got a very nice Emily Carr. And I've chosen this Lauren Harris as well. Again, I'm sorry, we've got 76 of the things. And we have his easel, and we've got various odd things as well, his paint box and all the rest of it. But Sand Lake is my favorite moment in sorry, you have to go back. Sand Lake is my favorite moment in Lauren Harris's career, and you've got a wonderful little sketch of Sand Lake. It's just this glorious moment in the sort of 2021, 23, where he paints with a particular palette, which I happen to love. I also notice you've got 2 by his son, Lauren P. Harris. You'd think he could have given him a different name, as he sort of disappeared as a footnote to his father's career. But Lauren P. Harris is a good artist, and you've got a couple. The other thing you've got that reminds me of Lauren Harris is an amazing collection from the Vanston estate. And it's full of things that Lauren Harris absolutely loathed, and is consequently a very good example of what he really was driving at when he created the Group of 7. And the Vanston estate's got things by the Hague School, Patrick Naismith, Scott, pretty good. Krieghoff, T. Sidney Cooper, who painted cows. Now, someone's got to love them, and I'm that person. I love them, and one of these days I'll borrow the lot and we'll have them in a room before what Lauren Harris did to them. David Milne, you've got some lovely David Milnes, just a couple, and that's really nice. You've got 3 watercolors and 2 dry points. We've got 44. This is not a competition, by the way. Okay, Arthur Lismer. Oh, I'm ahead of you. Yes, Arthur Lismer, of course, we all know him as a great painter and a great educator. I mean, he taught Canada and the world how to teach children art. He's a really important guy in that regard. You've got 3 drawings. We're very lucky here in that we have a great collection of his paintings, but we also have the archive, which came from his family. And one of the things about Arthur Lismer is that he never went anywhere without a sketchbook, and he sketched everything. He did cartoons, and here he actually captures Tom Thomson at work, at grip. And I love the fact that he's spilled the ink and hasn't noticed. That's actually a very important thing about Tom Thomson. He was focused he blocked out everything. And Arthur Lismer's poked fun at it. So I think it's a wonderful thing. Late Lismer, you've got a late Lismer too. This is slightly earlier. Onwards, I'm speeding up now. Charles Comfort. Again, you have 2, we have 3. And I love Charles Comfort. This one's on display, that's why it's a funny iPhone photo. He's a great artist. He's also from Edinburgh. As am I. And he became a director of an art gallery, the National Gallery, I'll have you know, Charles Comfort. So I feel a kinship with Charles Comfort. Goodrich Roberts, again, you've 5, we've got 4, so you beat us there. Sorry, it's not a competition. Now, this is something you don't have, and it just introduces the fact Norval Morisseau he's a difficult artist in the sense that there's been so much scandal recently. I'm sure you're all completely aware of the idea of fakes. Well, the date here is significant, 1979. In that year, Norval Morisseau was an artist in residence at the McMichael. One of the things that people don't give Robert McMichael enough credit for is that he collected Indigenous and Inuit work right from the start, really early on. And consequently, our indigenous collection is a full third of our collection. We have about 7,000 things in all, and a third of that is indigenous and growing all the time. So that's a point in his favor. You don't have any Franklin Carmichael, and that's a crime. Sorry. But, you know, he's my favorite, he's my guilty pleasure from the group of 7. And the thing about it is that we've made up for it because we have 520. It's ridiculous. But again, the McMichaels made the effort. They went and made friends with Ada Carmichael, his widow. And she had a bedroom full of works, which they then acquired either through her or through her daughter, Mary. But I just put this up because it's quite rare. It's an early drawing from Antwerp, when Carmichael went over to Antwerp to study at the Académie des Beaux-Arts, but had to come home because of the First World War breaking out. But this is what remains of it. This brings us up to date. This was acquired in the last 2 years because we are filling in gaps now like nobody's business. My chief curator, Sarah Milroy, who many of you will know, has completely revolutionized things. And we acquire things quite regularly now, largely by donation in the same way as the Rodman grew. This one, however, we purchased, and it's the most significant purchase we've made because this is one of 16. It's an entire suite of works by Kyrillik showing Jewish immigrant life in Canada. And we had to raise money because we don't have an acquisition budget. We had to raise 2.6 million in a couple of months to purchase this. It's a very significant development for the McMichael onwards. And obviously there are great gaps. The purchasing of indigenous work really stopped about 25 years ago. And so we're filling that gap now. And so Nadia Mir in the foreground, this wonderful kind of extended wampum belt. And the other thing that we haven't got in the background there, this is Denise Tomassos. And to our utter shame, this is the first work by a Black Canadian entering the McMichael collection. It's a promised gift, Denise Tomassos' Odyssey. And of course, we did a show of Denise Tomassos' work a couple of years ago, a year before the AGO. Just saying. Sorry. You should have known, Karen. This is also a major collection, acquisition that we've acquired. Rebecca Belmore, an Anishinaabe artist, serious international artist of great renown. And this was almost, Sarah bought this practically within her first week of arrival. It took the trustees quite by surprise that we acquired this. And the thing is, these are extraordinary pieces. They're actually taken from the earth. They're in Banff, Ontario, and New Brunswick. And she took a cast of the earth in aluminium and wrapped it around a kind of ear trumpet. And if you could see at the end here, there's a little ear piece at the end. In other words, it's about listening to the landscape. It's in a room full of sketches by the group of 7. And the idea is, you know, the group of 7 it's all visual. Rebecca Belmore, you engage with the landscape in a completely different way. It's a significant acquisition. And again, just to show some of the hang, we like to hang things so that they're in conversation with each other. And I thought I'd put these up, these astonishing cannibal bird masks. These will all be going off, incidentally, very soon. We have a huge exhibition of our indigenous work called Early Days, which is touring America. It opens in Phoenix in September with an enormous book with 70, count them, 70 essays in it. All of them bar, I think, 1 or 2 by indigenous contributors. This is something people perhaps don't know we have. In trust, we hold a collection of 90,000 drawings by Inuit artists from Cape Dorset. It was placed with us for safekeeping in 1990, and just last week we finished digitizing the entire collection, which will be available online to consult. And that does, I think, with apologies to Winnipeg, make us the largest holder of Inuit artwork. And just as a reminder, exhibitions are our driving force, like for everyone, I think, these days. Bear in mind, when McMichael set up the gallery, he didn't have to think about education particularly. Exhibitions weren't really a thing. And so the McMichael has changed forcibly. One of the first things I did when I took over was say, we must start planning our exhibitions to tour. If we are the champions of Canadian art, it has to be all Canadian art up to the present day. And it has to go across Canada and hopefully internationally. Currently, over the next 2 years, we have 12 major exhibitions touring the country. And all of those exhibitions come with publication, because that was the second thing I asked for. Every exhibition should have a great publication. And so we just opened Tom Thomson, and I hope to see you there. How did I do?
Lady Falconer, you're up.
Okay. Is this on? Yes? Okay. So Karen said she's going to be quite strict about the time, so I'm going to try and talk really quick. No, I won't talk that quickly. I'm not going to be competitive like Ian was. So first of all, I just want to say thank you. Both Ian and I know that we have many things in our jobs and our portfolios that we don't necessarily love to do. But showing up at a winery in early July to talk about art, and then you gave us a time constraint, it's not a good idea. Okay, so first of all, how many of you, I'm going to do the same thing, have been to the Art Gallery of Hamilton? Any of you? Okay, that's good. So quite a few of you. And of course, it's here in the region. So you would, of course, know the Art Gallery of Hamilton. So I'm going to move through these slides quite quickly while I give you a bit of an overview in terms of context, because a lot of it parallels closely with Rodman. And what's interesting is the intersectionality with the McMichael. First of all, I started my career at the McMichael. And unfortunately in the nasty years, but not so nasty because I had an amazing director, Barbara Tyler. She was phenomenal. And it was my first introduction actually to contemporary Indigenous art. And coming from my education in the UK and France, I had never seen contemporary Indigenous art like this. So I'm always grateful, which is why I said to Karen, this was a great idea to bring us together, because anytime I can spend time looking at art from the McMichael is wonderful. And it's amazing what Ian and Sarah have been doing with it. It's wonderful. So the big difference, and I'm going to move through this quickly because Karen, you already did a land acknowledgement, which this is a bit of the overview of today's presentation. So let me just sit here for a minute to say the big difference with the McMichael is that McMichael is what we would call museologically a founder-based art institution, whereas the Art Gallery of Hamilton is not unlike Rodman. It is really a municipal art gallery that grew out of the community. And it grew out of a combination of industry, right? Legacies, bequests, a really potent artist community. And it's wonderful to have Reinhard here. Where is he? Because he's been a beloved member of our board acquisition committee, I think for about 30 years. So there's another connector, is the wonderful Reinhard. So, you know, we're the third largest art collection now in Ontario, after the National Gallery and the Art Gallery of Ontario. Sorry, Ian. You can move to the next slide, Karen. And of course, you can just keep moving through these while I talk a bit about the history. I don't want to get into all this because you all know this. I just want to give you a sense that because of where we are right now, and this whole part of the province, basically this is the industrial cradle for Canada. And that is really and truly what gives birth to the Art Gallery of Hamilton. An enormously vibrant cultural ecosystem that didn't just happen now when people say, oh, artists are moving to Hamilton. That has been going on since the latter part of the 19th century, early 20th century. So here's the bigger map with a lot of the industries that we're seeing today. But this continues, the industries have shifted, but that is really what gives birth to that collection in the very early years. Next slide. So what really begins it officially, we are going to be 110 years old next year, which is why I'm not a founder of the institution. Or I'm looking really good, that's right, is some of what I just said, and also William Blair Bruce. William Blair Bruce was an important Canadian impressionist, and he dies prematurely in Sweden. He is practicing in France, in Sweden, a very, very important Canadian impressionist. And his family decides to donate that collection to the city of Hamilton, which is really the catalyst for the creation of the art gallery in 1914, or these 29 paintings. So again, we're going to move quickly through these. These are the early years. I'm going to stop here for a second and talk a little bit about AY, another wonderful intersection with the McMichael and your collection. So what's interesting about the Art Gallery of Hamilton is the very first director, not curator, director, because actually there was a curator years before. The very first director is T.R. MacDonald. Now, this is an incredibly unusual man. So he's not only an artist, was a war artist, he is a very close friend with the Group of Seven. And I want you to keep in mind the years I'm talking about, the 1940s. Think about the creation of the McMichael, think about the creation of Rodman, so think how early this is. And in fact, in this country, it is the AGH is still one of the oldest municipal galleries in the country, which is incredible. And of course, who recommends his appointment to the Art Gallery of Hamilton? Lismer, another connection to the McMichael. So, and of course, these are all contemporary artists of the day. These are the artists that he would work with. And AY is actually one of the very, very first acquisitions that comes into the collection. Next slide. I'm going to move through these quite, maybe we'll just sit here for 1 minute. Go back 1 second. Sorry, I keep doing this. One of the reasons I want to talk about the annual winter exhibitions is TR was very clever. And he didn't have much money. You know, he was Scottish, by the way. Of course. And they were quite stingy. He was quite stingy with the funding. Okay, I didn't mean that the way it sounded. Did I just say that? So, and he was very careful with the money. And so what he came up with was this idea of having these annual winter exhibitions where he would show the artist's works. And then he would lure, beg. He contrived ways to get collectors and donors to either get the collection, to buy the works for their own collections, or donate them to the Art Gallery of Hamilton. And even for the ones where he built up the local collections, he would then eventually have them donate the collections to the Art Gallery of Hamilton. And of course, you have to understand his tenure was from 1947 to 73. And think about that. So, think about when the McMichael starts. Think about when major collections in this country begin. He is acquiring not just any art. His eye is so good. He's an artist. He's a trained director as well. He'd been running the Mount Allison University Art Gallery. He really knew what he was doing, and he was very, very close with the artists. So he begins to acquire works, not only from the artists, but he begins to work very closely with a lot of the industrialists. Because again, what we have to all remember, I'm showing you some works where, and I know this happened to me as a young student. In fact, I did my graduate internship when I was here at York UT at the Art Gallery of Hamilton. I'll tell you why in a minute. Quite some time ago. I won't say how long ago, but quite some time ago. Because of the incredible works in the Canadian Historical Collection. And for example, I'm just showing you the Reed, the Cullen. He was best friends with Cullen's stepson, so he acquired enormous amounts and quality of Cullen's. This George Reed, for example, these are works that when you open any book on Canadian historical art, there they are. In fact, people often visit and say, I didn't know that was here, and that's here, and that's here. That's the Art Gallery of Hamilton. But what's interesting is it's sitting in Hamilton. So like Ian, 40 kilometers outside of he's in Kleinburg, we're what, 60 to 70 kilometers outside of Toronto. And what's interesting with both our collections, and I think this is where we share an affinity with Rodman, these are not parochial collections, right? These are very important collections. And the Tom Thomson, sorry to do this to you, Ian, but it is arguably the second best large Thomson canvas in the country. It's extraordinary. And again, why is this happening? Because TR is very close with the group, and he's able to acquire a lot of these works with those relationships, Birch Grove. Of course, this again happens with the Lauren Harris. No, Ian, we don't have the same number of Lauren Harrises, but what is extraordinary, and stop it, is the quality. Every single work hits a high note. It's the best of the best. So we have a number here which show and depict every single stage. Emily Carr. Again, we have some extraordinary, incredible works by Emily Carr in the collection. And some of these come through, think about all the companies who had those head offices in Hamilton, whether they were from the States or they were the mills like around here, right in the factories. Think of IBM. That's how we got those. You know, ICI goes to the McMichael. My father actually was a vice president there when that ICI collection went into the McMichael. Those major corporate head offices were, some of them were sitting in Hamilton. So a lot of that support, at one point there was a lot of money sitting in Hamilton and a lot of support for the arts. Interestingly enough, when you were bringing up thank you for going forward, because this is a good point about women artists. I wanted to touch on this. I was fortunate, it's actually wonderful that I was able to meet Robert and Signe McMichael. And I don't think I've shared this story with you, but I remember being in an acquisition committee meeting, which were really tense because this was in the 90s when he was not happy about what was coming in. And I was trying to make an argument with my director about women artists. And I said to him, okay, well, so just you tell me, who do you think are the good women artists in this country? And he literally said to me, well, there's only one, it's just Emily Carr, that's it. Well, again, you know what's interesting about the Art Gallery of Hamilton and T.R. MacDonald, and it's really T.R. who started this, if you go back to the women artists for a second, Karen, he had a real affinity with the Beaver Hall. And he really understood the talent. So again, something extraordinary that happens with the Art Gallery of Hamilton collection, even though it's not where we would like it, the percentage of women artists is unusually high. And one of the reasons is it started very, very early on. And where we share an affinity, I think, is around Hortense Gordon, for example, right? From Hamilton, part of the Painters 11. But women artists have always been strongly supported in this collection. And of course, we've got the wonderful Prudence Heward up there. The collection continues to grow. You can keep moving. I know Karen's mad at me because there's so many slides. The second building, this is a point I want to make, unlike an institution like the McMichael, but actually a lot like what has happened with the Rodman. We've moved around. We've moved, we were in the library at one point, we were on the McMaster grounds at another point in 52. Next slide. Carl Schaefer is another artist who had a very, very close relationship with T.R. MacDonald and the collection. I'm showing you more Cullens because, and also note, gift to the Women's Committee. I just want to make that point before we talk about the third building. Again, and I think this is a lot like the volunteers that surround Rodman, the important role that the Women's Committee played for the Art Gallery of Hamilton, it was critical to those major acquisitions. And TR worked very closely with the Women's Art Committee and the Women's Art Association to make sure that these works could come in, whether it was through fundraising for funds to acquire the works or to have those works donated. The third building, and where we are now, is, of course, in 1977, next, which is right in the core of the downtown. And I just wanted to give you a sense of what the acquisition policy looks like today. So 45 to 70% are Canadian works the past 40 years, 20 to 45 for works from earlier Canadian periods, and 10 to 25% from other schools, depending upon availability. And the other point I didn't really get to stress was the point that the European collection, not unlike Rodman, where you have works, was very strong from the beginning. TR helped to build up an early Dutch collection, and then we're going to talk about, of course, the French. More so. Again, this is my first introduction really to his work, started for me at the McMichael. And one of the things I always say about the McMichael, with all the issues that it had, the one thing it did that nobody did in Ontario in the way that Bob did was to support Indigenous art. He was quite something. If you could just go back to the...
You're over time.
Okay. The more so. And this is where I think the shift in what, that my tenure of the last 8 years has been around a very different tone in terms of the acquisition policy. These were rolled up, languishing in the vaults in the 80s. And when I arrived, I said, what are those? Oh, they're, Norval Morrisseau's, but we don't do Indigenous art. And this was, by the way, a policy for a lot of art galleries, including the National Gallery of Art, and that's why the McMichael really was unusual. And it was one of the big shifts that I made with my team, and which we have continued to foster. We stretched these, we hung these, and there was a lineup out the door the next day when we opened the exhibition. Over 100 Norval Morrisseau's were just sitting in the vaults. So this has been really exciting. Next slide. The fourth home, there's the Bruegel Bush by Kim Adams. Of course, we have a very strong contemporary collection. Next slide. And of course, the major donation of European, go to the next slide, is the big Tannenbaum gift. Very important, it's a game changer for the Art Gallery of Hamilton. Why? Because it really gives the art gallery an international dimension to the collection, which means all of a sudden there are demands for that collection around the world. Because of course Tannenbaum collected an extraordinary collection of primarily 19th century French, but also some Italian and others. He's known, for example, for the Keith Harings, all kinds of other things. So this really was a game changer for the Art Gallery of Hamilton. So today, and this is where I'm going to just wrap it up, as Karen is giving me the really evil eye, with Shelley Nero.
Evil eye here.
With Shelley, and why am I wrapping it up with Shelley Nero? Next slide. It's Karim Ferreira. These are some of the contemporary works we've been bringing in. These are the areas of strength. Next. I'm going to move quickly. I'm going to end with, I just want to come to there we go. I want to talk about this just for a minute. The Walking with Warriors. So in 2001, Rodman commissions Shelley Nero to do the works that you see on the left, life-size woodblocks for the grounds. From that series, she created a series of prints. And when I arrived at the gallery, remember I remarked about the Morrisseau's being in the vaults? My very first acquisition was a Shelley Nero. And in fact, much like what happened to poor Sarah with the trustees, I didn't consult anyone, I just bought them. I found out the golf club was going to deaccession them to put up a case of golf trophies. Shelley was quite upset. There was a huge article in The Spectator, and of course, I think it was day 4 for me at my new job, and on the desk is The Spectator, and I thought, oh, I know her work. I know it from the McMichael, actually. So the very first thing that I did, because Barbara used to have these wonderful exhibitions of contemporary Indigenous art, was to call the golf club. I said, I'd like those works. I'd like them donated. Now, they didn't donate them, which was criminal. I didn't get that far. I had to fork over the money. But it catalyzed the beginnings of a really important Indigenous collection, contemporary Indigenous collection for the art gallery. It catalyzed the retrospective, and I brought a catalog, so you can see, that just opened at the Smithsonian in New York, which we are traveling across the country next year. I think one of the things that both Ian and I share is the importance of taking our collections, which to me are our crown jewels. That's really how I see it. Which in many ways, part of my tenure has been about pushing that out, because unfortunately it was to some degree marginalized by the special exhibitions, but really taking that collection and getting it out there and accompanying it with publications. So I think it's wonderful that we share that connection to Shelley Nero. Why is Walking with Warriors important? It's also important to the region, was because she created the works in response to a field trip she took as a child, like many of us have done, about the War of 1812, and seeing all those wonderful memorials commemorating Brock. And what she noted was there was no mention of the Haudenosaunee, their involvement. There was no mention of women. And of course, she comes from a strong matriarchal culture. So she decided to create walking with warriors. And what I love about this work, if you get a chance to look at the catalog, is you'll see that inscribed in every woman in the prints to the right are the characteristics of strength, emotion, intellect, resilience. And it's really to her the qualities that women needed. It was about the racial and gender gap that she felt was in the historical narratives, because she felt that this is what women had to do at home to keep their families and communities going while the war was taking place. So I want to end with that, because the one, and Kathy is now giving, and Karen's now giving me a line. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What I am going to ask you to do, Shelley, because you mentioned the book and you're holding it beside you, and you'd like to see this closer, because I know this is not the optimal viewing. Can you put this in the page where it is, and then we can circulate and people can see while we're talking?
Yeah.
I was going to ask Mr. Art Ellis if he wanted to comment at all on early days memories before I dive in. Yes? No? Maybe?
I'll try to make it real quick.
And then I'll come to you, sir.
I was not a founding member, but I was there very early. In 1959, I was an apprentice carpenter, and we were pouring the concrete floor for the Red Floor Gallery, which was an addition going on, the first addition to Rodman Hall. And it's a hot July day, and we're trawling the cement, and we're putting the color in with the powder, that it's working hard, and the sun is blinding us. It's drying out very quickly, and oh my God, I'm down to my hands and knees, 4 or 5 other guys, and there's somebody's tapping on my shoulder. And I turned around and looked up, and here's this gentleman on a cane, and he'd been tapping me with his cane. And he says, "I want this floor as smooth as a billiard table top." And I said, "Well, with your footprints all over it, you won't roll a bowling ball on it." And I said to him, "Well, who the heck are you anyway?" He says, "My name is Peter Harris. I am the new curator, and this is the first day on the job." I happened to live right next door, and it wasn't long after I was building a house there that he was over supervising it. And then it wasn't long ago he had me on the board. And I spent probably 25 or 30 wonderful years as a board member with Rodman Hall as we built it. And the lessons that we learned, how these things get built, is going to take and I know that the Rain, I love the Rain name. I like it better than Rodman. I really think that's a tricky name, Rain.
Rain is positive. It's always a good thing when there's rain.
Yeah, and I know it's on its very infant steps. And there's some big hills and big mountains to climb ahead. I'm sure that this group has the strength to put it together and get the right people working on the jobs. It's going to take a lot of sweat and hard work, as the curators have told us, and make it grow. And I think it will grow.
So I'm going to take the liberty of throwing out a question with respect to the collection, because you've both done, and I have to say thank you. When you ask them to, I asked them to look, and Isabel sent the link for them to reference. We've digitized the collection, by the way, so they're able to go through and take a look. I really didn't expect that deep a dive. I won't lie, so I'm quite, please give them another hand, because the assessment you did is exceptional, even in its competitive spirit. I saw that, we all saw that. But competition's good. It shows that there's a great value in the collection that is in this region. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the now, like how, even for us at Rodman, and we don't have 7,000, we have a little over 1,000 pieces in the collection. How do you think about what it means to continue to build the collection now? And this is particularly in thinking about whether or not you're letting things go to take things in, or how it is you go about building the relationships with donations, because we, as you said, this collection was built either through people who were passionate and created it, and then it was moved into public properties, or people who donated to an institution. We're in that, similar to Art Gallery of Hamilton, people donated to create the collection. So how do we connect this back to the people like organizations like NAC, where there's regional artists who are making work where's the place for them in these type of institutions regionally? Because I think that's one of the markers that's going to be really important for us going forward, is not just what comes from Europe or what comes from a big collector, but how we connect. And then, sir, I haven't forgotten about you. You're next after me.
You're heading right down the same alley.
Is that where you're going?
I mean, I think Ian, I understand the way you were talking. You had a chance to look at the collection, right?
Yeah.
And I did the same thing recently, about 2-3 weeks. No, thanks. And I went, wow. Okay, what do we have here? And then I started going through piece by piece by piece and going like, what do you see? Do you see any potential for a focus, a lane to travel down? Because obviously your two organizations have focuses and know where you're going. And I don't think this organization has that, and it's the first thing that has to be established to carry forward. And you've got this collection. It's got to make you some money. Bottom line, your collection, your exhibiting is bringing in money. There's nothing to be ashamed about. Let's be capitalists. If you want to support the arts, you need money.
We need capitalists, but we don't necessarily want to be. Thank you for coming, by the way, Don. We had a long conversation about his interest in the collection. It's okay. He told me he was a little chatty on the phone.
Okay.
Okay.
I would say, first of all collections have personalities, and they're all distinct. And that's because they grow in different ways. In my very long career, I've looked after various collections, mainly Old Master. I mean, I have a bequest in London, which is, Vermeer and Rembrandt, Dulwich Picture Gallery. And Dulwich Picture Gallery, like the McMichael, but 2 centuries earlier, was a founder-based collection. It was put together by 2 art dealers in the 1810s. And the thing about them is that personalities grow out of the accidents that create a collection. And so, funnily enough, looking through the 1,000 works, which I did with tremendous pleasure, I might add, I was taken by the fact that it did have such a strong personality of its own. It has certain strengths. It's particularly strong in works on paper, obviously. And very strong in sort of 1960s, 1970s, and obviously a lot of very strong local artists as well. And that has happened just by the usual means. Like there are an awful lot of Peter Harrises. Now I understand why. There are an awful lot of Ed Bertinskys, and that's because Ed Bertinsky makes sure that his works are in every collection. He's very assiduous like that. And there are bequests and there are donations from local collectors. And to my astonishment, I thought it was actually had a very powerful personality. Now, the question of how you use that is more complicated, particularly when you're starting from scratch like this. You're trying to find a way of making use of it. But basically, you have the wherewithal. I mean, I'm an exhibitions person. I always have been. That's sort of 38 years of exhibitions. And I was looking at it and thinking immediately in terms of exhibitions, things that would hang really well together. So don't underestimate it. And it's different from the McMichael, it's different from Hamilton, but it's not without a lot of personality. It's a lot of opportunity there.
So one of the reasons, and I think the board and the staff would say this at Rodman, that we're interested in making sure this is reestablished is that belief that it is a unique and it does have a lane. One of the things that I think with any startup is it's how do you contextualize what that lane is? What is the language you use to make people understand the value? And that's part of the reason for starting to have these conversations, is to allow you as community members to be able to get excited about it, And I know as you were going through, I was like, oh, I didn't even remember. You see the threads that connected to the broader Canadian cultural landscape. Shelley, in a comment?
Yeah, I felt the same way when I went through the collection, and I've, of course, known the Rodman. I've visited, I did some work for Brock University for several years, so I was fortunate enough to know Stuart Reid, and I've always had a connection to that collection. And maybe due to some of the parallels, the strong ones with the Art Gallery of Hamilton and the region. But this is, I guess, if I can provide some feedback or advice, one of the things that we had to do when I first arrived at the Art Gallery of Hamilton was really look at the collection. And I think what's really important for all of you to do is you're here for a moment in time. These collections are going to exist long after we've gone, right? And that's how I sort of saw my role, and that's how my team, that's how we all see our role. What are we going to do in this period of time with that collection? And so we started to look at what the gaps were, and we knew we had a big problem with our local community. Because there had been some studies done prior to my coming in, and the local community felt very alienated by the gallery. The feeling was it was very much a Kunsthal in Hamilton. A Kunsthal in Toronto is one thing. A Kunsthal in Hamilton is problematic. So for example, and I'm just using us as an example, what we did, I made a decision right there and then, two things. We were going to prioritize artists from the region, from the local community. They were going to be embedded in the program in every way from now on. And the other point, I got in the car and went right out to Six Nations. And do you know what I was told when I arrived there? I don't think we've ever had a visitor from the Art Gallery of Hamilton. So connecting with your local community, which you all are, is so important. It has been, I think, our lifeline in many ways. The transformation that we've seen over the last 8 years in terms of attendance, in terms of the response from the local school boards. I found out that the local boards, you're not going to believe this, Ian, they were going to the McMichael and the AGO. Right? And I couldn't believe it. I thought, well, as the person who built up the educational programs back then, I was sort of proud for a minute, and then I thought, okay, I've got a big problem on my hands. I brought the two directors in of the separate board and the public board. Do you know what they told me when I showed them the vaults, the group of 7 and everything? They said, we had no idea this stuff was here. So the disconnect with the broader community, not the people in the know, obviously the donors and the artists, and so certain people know. I mean the broader community. And what was really helpful is I went to a Ticats game in my first few weeks there. And I thought, okay, where are all these people? Why aren't they at the gallery? And that's, I really start, between your collection and your local community. And one of the things I explained to my board was, we have to start hanging this collection. People have to fall in love and be proud. I'm a Montrealer. And, when I go to Montreal, even if I have just 10 minutes, I run into Musée Beaux-Arts just to look at Osias Ludwig's apples. And then right away, I feel so back at home, right? People need to fall in love with their collections. Then they feel ownership. They need to start early when they're young, but they can do it. They need to go on dates. They need to bring their visiting aunt. And I think it's a wonderful thing that the McMichael, that Bob really did, Bob McMichael early on, is he basically forced everyone to fall in love with that collection. But he really did foster that. So people feel a strong connection. I remember we took down Pick Island once just to reframe it. And there was literally a revolt. We got letters and complaints. And I think that's what you have to do, those connections with the local community in your collection, and really keep in mind your local artists in a really strong way.
But that's really, sorry.
It's okay, you go.
Just saying this whole business of community, and it's not directly relevant, but your point, Shelley, is that Bob McMichael did create this very strong entity. And, as I'm sure you all know, we've got 6 of the group of 7 buried in the grounds, which is taking it a little far, I think. But the thing is that we now have this issue where basically a lot of people just assume that that's what we are. And we're not anymore. And that's not an elitist thing deciding, we want to be about modern art, how boring. I love the group of 7. As long as I'm there, they will always be on display. But what has happened is not only a cultural shift in time, but also a community shift. And this is sort of tangentially relevant, I think, in that I mentioned at the beginning that we were 40 kilometers outside Toronto. That's not what we are now. We're in the center of Vaughan. Vaughan is one of the fastest growing cities in North America. And so in the 12 years that I've been coming to Canada, and certainly in the 6.5 I've lived here, you know, there's a kind of Manhattan growing up daily in Vaughan. You know, it's an entire new city growing up around us, and Kleinberg is actually in Vaughan. So we have this business of people assuming they know what the McMichael is, but actually our audience has fundamentally changed. And there are something like, you know, I think it's about 172 languages spoken in Vaughan. So if we want to be a community hub, and we do, we want to be the kind of living room for Vaughan, then we have to do, as Shelley was saying, you have to actually reach out to an entire new community that doesn't naturally come there. And that's done by being relevant to that community. And so that's done through contemporary artists and being as broad as you can. The one thing we have that is useful in this regard is that we are about Canada. We're about the art of Canada. So that is the link. We're about new Canadians, we're about Indigenous Canadians, we're about all Canada. And that brings it all together. But, you know, it's hard getting the Italian community of Vaughan to come to the McMichael. Michelangelo wasn't Canadian. He tried, but...
I'm wondering, to your point about new Canadians, young people, getting those new audiences, and I'll throw this as the last one because I want to give a chance for you all to just be able to come up and speak to folks individually and to connect with each other. So we're going to stick to our half an hour to mingle as we just kind of enjoy a laid-back evening at a winery and a beautiful art gallery. But I'm wondering about digitization. Like we have been securing grants at Rodman to update the collection, to update the back end so that it's on more robust platforms that are more connected to museological best practices. And then looking at getting copyright approvals around digitization so that we could, for instance, do a projection of some of the works. You mentioned Ed Bratinsky. He is a St. Catherine's born and raised gentleman. And so some of his presence is like, how do you do something if you can't physically get people to come? Because we have that challenge of we don't have a place for you to go. So we have to, as they would say, take it to the street. So how do we get the digital application as a way of getting out in community, but also as a way of making it accessible sometimes from an educational standpoint, or even for, you know, talks like this. So I'm wondering how important the digital platforms, everything from social media websites, is for collections like yours.
Well, funny enough, Ian and I were just talking about this. So before we came up, we were both talking about that wonderful pandemic that we all experienced. The big shocks, I think, for the art sector, for art museums, was, I mean, we were basically all like dinosaurs. The thought of having to, you know, put everything online was just, and I came into an institution where the previous director didn't believe actually in digitizing. In fact, she had written with a few other directors, the federal government, asking them to stop siphoning funding off to doing that and put more into publications. So nothing, like next to nothing, had been digitized at the Art Gallery of Hamilton. So we had, in fact, the wonderful Rebecca, who's here, has been really at the forefront of helping us to not only find that funding, but as a librarian, she's been really helping us to change that. But what we found, both of us, with the pandemic was all of a sudden, by forcing our staff at times to push out our assets digitally, the response was shocking. It was, I mean, shocking. And in fact, I'll start with the art sale, which we usually represent somewhere like 60 to 80 local artists for sale. We were about to open, we were a month away, and the pandemic started. So everybody was, well, forget it, there goes our art sale. And I said, no. I said, you know what? I felt so badly for the artists. I said, well, just put the work up. I wasn't expecting it. I said, it doesn't matter how it does. Well, how are we going to put it up? And I don't know if they have them digitized. And, everybody was in a state. How are we going to do this? Anyways, we had about 3 weeks to do it. We got it all up on a site. And shock of all shocks, it was the best sale we'd ever had. Why? Because everybody was sitting at home looking at their walls and worrying about how to get on Zoom and look great. So the works were just flying out. We couldn't believe it. And that, I think, catalyzed, it really excited the staff. The educational content we started pushing out online. We essentially turned our art institution into a TV studio. That's really what we became, and we both talked about how we were fortunate to have a filmmaker on staff who could really help us with the production values, because it's not something that curators and museologists and educators know anything about how to do. So it was transformative. So I think that's a really important way to go. And I think, again, when we're talking about relevance to community, I think the other big shift, just to add that piece in that we created in terms of prioritizing our acquisitions, is, and to Ian's point about you need to really connect with the community, our BIPOC artists. And that was something we started when I came in 8 years ago, because we also had those challenges as well. I mean, the numbers were, and it's true for actually any older traditional art museum has that issue. And why? Because we're fundamentally colonial constructs. We just are. That's why, to me, the term decolonizing an art museum, you'd have to actually blow it up. These are colonial constructs. So to me, it's about decentering is really what you're doing. So, I think that's wonderful that you've started to do that.
Can I have, I've got two.
You could get the last word.
Yeah, I will do this. Two digitization points to make. One was like Shelley's story there. My COVID story was that I just hung a huge exhibition on the Group of Seven, because 2020 was, of course, the centenary of their founding, and we'd planned for, I was going to give a lecture on May the 7th, the opening of their first exhibition, 100 years on, and it was all planned, and I would have been talking to about 120 people in our big Gallery 8, and COVID happened, and so we moved it online. Now, 4,000 people saw it in 18 countries in the world, and that kind of we just couldn't believe it, and this carried on. We were talking, Sarah did one on Maud Lewis, and of course the whole world tuned into that as well. These are lessons that we have to learn about the importance of your virtual offer as well. Our education department collaborates with Connected North. I don't know whether yours do as well, and those kind of things go out to remote communities across the north of Canada that can't actually get to galleries like this. And so the importance of the imagery that you can actually share is crucial. Now, my second point, it's actually third, but anyway, my second and a half point actually goes back to Ed Bertinsky, because I mentioned the 90,000 Inuit drawings that we look after for the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative at the McMichael. Part of the idea of taking those in 1990 was to protect them. Obviously, the Baker Lake fire had terrified everybody, and so we were giving them a safe haven. But part of that deal was that these would be digitized and made available. Now, the thing about digitization is that it's expensive. And it takes a lot of time. It's difficult to take all these photos to the right degree of competence. And so it kind of lurched along for a few years. And we did a few hundred or a few thousand whenever we could. And eventually we opened a portal on the website, which you can find, which is called Iningat Ilagit, which is a place for family. And there were 4,000 of the works, of the 90,000. Were available for Inuit youth, mainly, to actually look at and engage with, because they were family. How have we just finished digitizing the 90,000? Ed Bertinsky.
That's good to know.
Ed Bertinsky invented a machine to do it. And it's a great big circular thing that goes whiz, 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 and takes photographs every 2 or 3 seconds. 90,000. We've just done 60,000 in about 3 months.
Wow. I know. Wow. My brain exploded like yours did.
Get on the phone.
Right away.
I'm
Can I
emailing Nicholas Mativier this moment.
Can I add one more?
I'm gonna
Okay,
let
yeah.
John Mann, because it is his house.
Oh, of course.
Do you want to come up, or should I come to you? I feel like people want to see you, John Mann. You could say hello. Can't let Margie do all the talking. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting us.
I'm just curious, in terms of major galleries such as yours, what's the present position in terms of acquiring new artists that are looking to come into the market? We're reading a lot about the Indigenous community, about women, and about restrictions based on boards in the different galleries. Is that a situation that creates a problem for new artists? Is that
And we have very different policies. It has to do with your bylaws and your policies to begin with. I mean, I think that was one of the big problems with Bob, was that he was and wanted to be so restrictive, and that's why those lawsuits happened. And that acquisition, I mean, in the days when I was there, really controlled what comes in. In the institution with the Art Gallery of Hamilton, as a director, it is really ultimately up to me that decides the acquisitions, along with an acquisition committee. And I have freedom up to 50,000 when I feel, like I did with the Shelley Neros, that was the right thing to do. So we have an acquisition committee that recommends to the board. We have a lot more freedom in our institution. And I would say that, you know, an example would be Kareem Ferreira's work. This is an extraordinary artist. I mean, he's a superstar in the US, not as well known in Canada, which is odd. He was literally on the cover of Vanity Fair magazine, collected by all of the big basketball players who I don't really know, but you know all the big names. Yeah, okay, Lizzo, and you know, he's huge, I know, but the staff think I'm very embarrassing because of that. But anyways, so I wanted to get a piece because he's from Hamilton. It was really important to me. The problem is they're selling for, you know, 50,000, 70,000 Canadian in LA. We went to our community. We just turned to the community to start a matching campaign, and it's been incredibly successful. Everyone is like, nope, the Art Gallery of Hamilton has to have a Kareem Ferreira. We're so proud of him. And that was the point I was gonna make around the digitizing too, and it's tied a bit to what you're saying. You know, just really turn to your local community. One of the really bizarre things that happened to us as well during the pandemic is our docent group, who has been around for a long time, said, you know, we would like to try to do something online too. We'd like to go into the vaults and try and show a piece or two because we have nothing to do. We can't do tours. And I thought, okay, whatever. We'll let them go into the vaults, sent in the filmmaker. It was called Fridays at 4. Hundreds of people from all over the world started tuning in. We were in complete shock. It became one of our most successful programs. It was not led or run by the professional staff in the institution. It was all run by the volunteers. So, you know, I think back to the power of community, it's much bigger than you think.
Yeah. I'd also like to say that besides welcoming you here, it's good to see the turnout for Rodman Hall with local community. I know that it's been a struggle, and it's just good to see people that are interested in the arts community and trying to put something back together in a community that we've been involved in for many, many years and struggled with here in St. Catharines. So congratulations for coming and paying attention, and for these two wonderful people to come and give us advice on what's happening in the major world of art. So,
thank you for hosting. Asada, are you going to be really brief?
Yes.
Gonna come up or just there? Programming committee volunteer. We have to let her say something.
Thank you, and thank you so much. This has been amazing. I'm just going to ask from the other side of being a minority artist who definitely loves St. Catharines, and I owe my very short at this point artistic career to the St. Catharines community and Rodman. One of my pieces was in the Dejardin exhibition and got bought by the Canada Arts Council. That was it is an exhibition in Ottawa. But it's not about me right this minute. It's about the fact that I'm also an educator. And I'm trying to change art and art history out of the European, less European. We can't ignore it, but bring in the others. And I'm also an artist of color. So we've been talking about community, we've been talking about the others, right? And so I feel like it's important as an artist and also an educator, how do I advise my students and also myself, how do we get the word out there?
I'm gonna jump in to say, as I said, I want us to break up so you can probably get to talk to them one-on-one. I think for me, the connection to community has kind of been underscored here about the institution has to reach out, and as John said, that's one of the reasons we're so excited that you all came for this conversation, because we'll continue this reach out and continue to connect, because it's essential that as much as there may be different paths for students and emerging artists to find their way in, it's about artist-run centers existing with community institutions, existing with local collectors and donors. It's about corporates who are willing to buy for their organizations. It's all that mix. It's about the arts councils and the public funding layers. It's all that ecosystem that's important for a sustainable career for artists. But it's also about people just caring, because the advocacy attached to the caring is what results in the sustainability for careers. So I'll leave it at that. I will thank you all so much for turning up and for being interested in being an amazing audience. Please meet somebody you don't know. I feel like that's my rule if you come out in a creative setting. Meet a new person. Enjoy the glorious wine, the gorgeous art. Thank you again, Mr. John Mann, and thank you all for coming, and just thanks to our board members. I also gotta throw out a love to Liz. Thank you for showing up, my friend, and for your support and helping to get the word out. Get home safe. Thank you. Thank the two of you. I didn't say thank you to the two of you. Thank you.